Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing something a little bit different, which will be to update our Planet 40k ratings from the HQ area of the Necron Codex. This is partly due to the changes of meta alongside the frequent codex and supplement releases, so this isn't a review video as such, so there's no deep diving into rules and abilities like we normally do, just a quick summary along with how they've adjusted in the rating. So all the models in today's video have been previously reviewed, so it might be worth making sure you've seen all those before you get into this video. So let's begin with Imotekh The Stormlord. So on the channel he was given a 3 stars, starting off with the good points about him. You can get 2 command points by taking him. He's got the Pharaon ability, he's got the Lord of Storm ability, got a fair amount of weaponry as well, a 4+ phase shifter invuln save, and then he's got an extra wound when you compare him to a normal Overlord. As for the bad, he's a Thaltech only character, which in my opinion is quite an underpowered dynasty compared to the other dynasties within the book and also the custom codes. He's quite pricey versus an Overlord, which is 95 points, or a command Barge, which comes at the same price of 145 points. He's got no access to relics, he's got no pick of his Warlord trait, and he's got no access to the Resurrection Orb or the Orb of Eternity. So I think this one will remain at 3 stars. If he wasn't locked into the Thaltech code, he's easily a 4-star unit, but the fact that his dynasty heavily relies on warriors, yet this model can't actually take a Resurrection Orb, it's a bit backwards. He also doesn't really buff himself with his own dynasty abilities, which I kind of find odd. In other factions this wouldn't happen. Next on the list we've got Orikan The Diviner. This guy was originally given a 1.5 out of 5 not too long ago. So the good points about him, he's a master Chronomancer, which has the ability to buff anyone in your army. He can also buff dynastic agents, which includes Praetorians, which lack quite a lot of synergy within the codex itself. He has an empowered profile, which is pretty beefy if you get it going. Then he's got a 4+ invuln save. As for the bad, he's got no access to relics again, no access to Cryptek Arcana, even though he's a Cryptek. He's got no access to a Warlord trait selection. His empowered profile is very uncommon. Even if you manage to get it, it's usually too late in the game to have any real effect. And then lastly, a Chronomancer is just more flexible and only costs 80 points as opposed to 110. So the rating is going to be dropped down to a 1 star. He's still pretty usable, but you just have much better options that do it for a lot cheaper. Unless you're taking Praetorians, he's a complete waste. Third in the codex is Anrakyr The Traveller. So we gave him a 3 star back in December. So the good points about this unit is, so he's got all the Overlord buffs which can be buffing multiple dynasties in a single army due to the fact that he's a dynastic agent. He grants an extra attacks which synergizes great with core units, even warriors become quite a scary threat in melee. His Mind in the Machine ability is quite unique and quite fun as well, and it also takes away the need to have a ranged weapon. I mean, he does have, of course, a Tachyon arrow, but that's a one-use only weapon. Then finally, he's got a 4+ invuln save. As for the bad, no dynasty buffs that work on him due to him being a dynastic agent. Yet again, no relics because he's a named character, so no Veil of Darkness, which is kind of needed for your Lich Guard in particular. No Resurrection Orb either if you wanted to take him with warriors. Then again, no choice of Warlord trait. Once you weigh up the pros and cons, without that +1 attack buff he's probably a 2, but that alone can create some real neat combos. And the fact that he's not tied to a dynasty like some other named characters, he can fit in anywhere. So for me he stays at an average option which remains at a 3 star. Next in the codex was Vargard Obyron, aka Buzz Lightyear. He was given a 1.5 not long ago. The pros of this model, he's got a very beefy stat line, he's very good in melee, he's got great synergy with the Nemesor Zahndrekh, he's got the ability to jump around the board, and then he carries all the standard Necron Lord abilities too for the rerolls of 1s. As for the bad, he's another model tied to the underwhelming Thaltech dynasty. He needs Nemesor Zahndrekh to be useful for his points, which isn't a great HQ selection in general. Lords are generally used to save points, whereas if you're taking both the Thaltech models here, it's going to be very heavy on costs. Again, no options to relics and the Warlord traits and all that kind of stuff. No Resurrection Orb, which is kind of the main purpose for taking a Necron Lord within the list, because it's a cheap Resurrection Orb option. He's got no invuln save, so isn't likely to last, especially if he's purely a melee based model. Then finally, Lords are 30 points cheaper and do more or less the same sort of role. If you want a choppy melee character, there's just better options for you. Even a regular Overlord is a better option who is only 100 points when you add a War Scythe. For me, this one is going to stay at 1.5 stars. He still packs a punch in combat, but realistically you're not taking him. Not only do you need to be playing the Thaltech dynasty, but even as a Thaltech player you need to actually make the decision to choose him over all the other HQs in the codex. It's going to be a rare sight to even see him on the battlefield. So the next profile in the codex is Illuminor Szeras. This one's a weird one as I don't hear many people fielding him. We gave him a 3.5 star rating at the start of December. For the good, he permanently buffs core units for the remainder of the game, although it is a random buff what they get. He's got a monster stat line. I feel like he should have actually had the monster keyword because his stats are that good. He's got a pretty good damage output both in range and in melee. He's got a nice little bit of anti-psycho too with the Empiric Overcharger ability. You can heal a model per turn or D3 if it's warriors, and you can reuse this ability a second time as long as it's a different unit. And then finally, he can take Crypto rolls as a backup without using an elite slot. On to the bad, the Atomic Energy Manipulator is pretty much redundant at any stage. By the time you're starting to kill models, you've already sort of buffed all your core units anyway, so it's kind of not that great. He's a Dynastic Agent, so no Dynasty buffs for him. He's a named character, so no relics, no war gear, no choice of Warlord traits, no Cryptek Arcana because he's named. He's 160 points, which is very expensive for a Technomancer, when an actual Technomancer costs 75. So he's more than double the points. Not only that, he doesn't have Dynastic Advisors, so he will always take up a slot. Whereas all the other Crypteks have Dynastic Advisors, so they don't take up slots if you take multiple of them. So as mentioned, I barely hear or see anything about him. Maybe it's due to the HQ area of the book being quite packed, so no one really has the chance to select him, unfortunately. He needs to be slightly dropped in his rating. I personally love the model, but I don't even use him myself, so I'm going to be pushing him down to a 3-star model. Okay, next we've got one of the South-Tech characters, which is the Nemesor Zahndrekh. Received a 2 from me back in February of this year. Of course, he comes with all the usual Overlord buffs. He's got a 4+ invuln save to match that. Then he's got his ability to deny a stratagem once per battle. This is situational, but really can be a game changer in some cases. Like a 30 strong Orc Boy mob trying to use their green tide stratagem, but getting denied that use, so you can just finish the unit off. He also buffs core units with a random stat boost for the rest of the game, similar to Zalrez. Then he synergizes well with Obyron, of course. As for the bad, stuck in the South-Tech code again, not much damage output. He costs 40 points more than an Overlord, who's a lot more flexible. No relics, no war gear options, no resurrection orb, no selection of Warlord trait, all the usual stuff with the name characters. If you do play South-Tech, then you're most likely going to be selecting a generic Overlord or Imotekh. Then finally, as Liam Hobbs said in the comments on his review, he's eternally dabbing. That for me is an instant no. So I'm standing by that 2-star, and the counter tactics do keep him afloat from a 1.5, but being South-Tech is a huge negative for me. If you play South-Tech, then he's more like a 3, maybe a 3.5, but for everyone else he's a 2. Next on the list we've got Trazyn The Infinite. He was given a 2-star only last month. He's got all the standard Overlord buffs, he's got the 4+ invuln save. He hands your army a free relic, although you need characters that can actually hold relics, so Trazyn actually can't. And the first relic is free anyway, so for this to be of any use, you need 2 generic character models plus Trazyn in your list for it to actually work, which might not always be the case. You could avoid him being killed by using the Surrogate Host ability, and he isn't tied to any dynasty, which is both good and bad. Moving on to the bad, he's a Dynastic Agent, so no Dynasty privileges. His ability Surrogate Host actually kills off a character that he takes over, which is likely going to be a better character than he is, because most are. Now he can take over maybe a Chronomancer for example, but now you've just lost your Chronomancer ability, which is the whole point of building a Chronomancer in the first place, so I'm not really that keen on this ability. His damage output is pretty poor, no relic option even though he gives out a free relic, no resurrection orbs, no choice of warlord trait, all that jazz. And the Overlord model is just a better option in every aspect. For me, he's between a 2 and a 2.5. I don't think he deserves a push up, so he's going to stay where he is for now. Okay, we've finally passed the name guys now, so we're looking at the Royal Warden next. He was given a 4.5 star from us very early back in October 2020. So starting off with the good things about this model, he gets your core units out of combat with the adaptive strategy ability. He's got a pretty good ranged weapon which can remove a marine per turn, which should almost see his points back. As for the bad, no invuln save. Some would argue that 75 points to have the ability to fall back is pricey. I personally think it's good value. If you've got a 20-man warrior blob, that's 3.75 points per man to have the ability, although 20 won't be alive after you've been charged on. But it's our only method of getting guys out, unless you're using a Veil of Darkness relic. That actually may be a better option, but people tend to use that to be more aggressive rather than be defensive. He's got no invuln save, so he can be sniped off the board as well. Now, a 4.5 is pretty high for this current meta, so this does need dropping down a peg or 2. I think he's more of a 3.5 now, just above average as a support character, but definitely not an auto-include anymore. Okay, next we got the Skorpekh Lord, another one that started the edition very strong, with a very strong rating from us. He was actually the poster boy of the 9th edition release. Was given a 5 out of 5. Not many have seen that sort of rating from us, but this again was done back in October where only Marines and Necrons were out in 9th and everything was still very fresh. So I'm pretty sure we know what's coming with this model. So starting with the good, 4 up invuln. Good in melee, good in shooting. He's an all-round beast to be fair with his damage output. He hurts both elite units and horde units and synergizes quite well with destroyer cult units. He's got monster stats, again probably should have a monster keyword rather than the infantry keyword. As for the bad, doesn't synergize well with the rest of the book. Okay, he does with the destroyer cults, but they kind of don't need him. They're pretty deadly on their own. As this area of the book is pretty crowded, you usually want some sort of noble on the board for the command protocols and maybe a resurrection orb. Then you want either a Cryptek or a Royal Warden, possibly both. So it really doesn't give you much elbow room to get a beat stick in too, such as your Skorpekh Lord. Especially when units such as a command barge can fill lots of these different roles. such as being a beat stick with the noble keyword and hold a resurrection orb as well. He's actually quite pricey at 130 points when you compare him to other options in the codex. So we can't be having a 5-star rating anymore, unfortunately. I personally love the model, but even I have trouble finding a place for him in the list. So this might hurt a little, but it's going to go down to a 3.5 star. If you do take him, he's going to do bits for you, but that's if you can take him. Next is one of the alternative options, which is the Lokhust Lord. Received a 4-star from me. There was a point in time where I'd fight this model's corner over a Skorpekh Lord, but he's got the same sort of issues as he does. So let's get into the summary first. He's got a 4+ invuln save, decent in melee, synergizes with destroy cults again. He's got rare access to a resurrection orb even though he's not a noble unit. Then he's quite tanky. He's also got the phylactery to double the effectiveness of living metal, and he has fly too. On to the bad, again doesn't synergize that well with the book, although the resurrection orb does bring him ahead of the Skorpekh Lord slightly in that field. Again, as this is quite a crowded area of the book, it's going to be quite hard to field him, but he does have that resurrection orb, so at least you've got some use out of him. But without the noble keyword, you don't really have command protocols, but you could just bring a non-named noble, can just hold a resurrection orb, such as a Necron Lord, so you don't really need to pay for a Lokhust Lord. He doesn't have the same damage output as a Skorpekh Lord, so this one's another dropper for me, unfortunately. I'm going to be giving him a 3-star. Sort of in the middle. Command barges do a better job, or just get a regular Lord with an orb if you want to go for the cheap orb carrier. Speaking of the Lord is next. One of our most recent reviews, in fact, caused a little bit of controversy in the comments because I gave him a 3.5. Now he's your cheapest method of getting an orb onto the table. He's also the cheapest method of having command protocols in your army. Buffs your core units with rerolls of 1s to hit. Is perfect for you when you want a guy just to stand back and carry an orb for as cheap as possible. However, he has got no invuln save, he doesn't fight very well, and you don't want to be kitting him out spending too much points on him, making him expensive. That's the whole point of having a Lord, is to go cheap. If you want to kit out a Lord, you may as well just get an Overlord or a Command Barge. Some would argue that for a total of 100 points for a cheap orb in the army isn't worth it, as you need to bring back 8 warriors just to pay for it. But he does have other uses too, as we've already mentioned. I still stick with that 3.5. Competitively speaking, if you go to a tournament, for example, every single point matters. You don't need a 95 point Overlord in the back lines holding a 5-point war scythe and then paying 30 points for the orb for him just to stand around waiting to pop it. The Lord does the exact same thing for much less. Moving on before we cause a riot in the comments is the Catacomb Command Barge. This, in my opinion, is the alternative option. If you want a noble that goes up and down the table slicing stuff up, then he's your man. Now we gave him a 4.5 star, and here's why. Toughness 6, 9 wounds, quantum shielding alongside living metal. So he's got a 5+ invuln save, making him a very tanky unit. Still has a lookout Sir rule in effect, as he's got less than 10 wounds. He's got access to everything: war gear, relics, resurrection orbs, choice of warlord traits. He's got all the Overlord buffs. He's a vehicle, so he can shoot into combat. An Overlord on foot or a normal Lord doesn't have access to any other cannons. He can be upgraded to a Pharaon, and he fulfills 2 roles for one, being a beat stick and a noble with a resurrection orb. As for the bad, he's not as strong as a Skorpekh Lord, he's got no access to a void scythe. Overlords, both named and unnamed, have a 4+ invuln save, although they don't have quantum shielding. He does have a 12-inch movement, but he doesn't need it if he's staying with warriors with the resurrection orb. But other than that, he's a top 10 unit in my opinion. For me, he's going to stay at 4.5. He's actually now my go-to HQ when I play Necrons. Next is a model we can't seem to get away from, which is the Overlord. Had a 3.5 from me. Now he's a great unit. He's our generic create your own character on foot model. He's got access to everything like a command barge does, except he doesn't have the vehicle weapon, but he can at least get a void scythe. He's 50 points cheaper than the barge, so if you want a midway unit that's a jack of all trades, then he is the one. He buffs core units and synergizes well with his orb. Veil of Darkness is more suited to him as well over the barge, as the barge has the movement so it doesn't quite need it. Also, he can take the Pharaon keyword to double down on the My Will Be Done ability. Then he can be quite a reasonable countercharge unit in your backlines, which is something a Necron Lord won't be able to do. As for the cons, for me you're either using a beat stick model, which in this case is a command barge, or you're using it as an orb carrier to get an Necron Lord. Having the ability to do both is flexible, but you're going to pay the cost for it, and in game you won't likely be using both of the roles with him. Being good at everything simply means you pay for everything, but in a 5-turn battle you won't need everything with that one model. I don't feel like it's a planned out character. If you did, you'd find the alternative that's a cheaper option, or one that just does the job in a more effective manner. Okay, the right shields are down. I'm going to be giving him a 3.5, which is what he had already. He's more closer to a 4 than a Necron Lord in fairness, if that's any consolidation, but I can't stretch it, not yet anyway. Okay, so we're now down to the 4 Cryptek models, starting off with the Technomancer. Received a 4-star review back in October. So this guy can take any Arcana, which is quite a lot of flexibility for your lists. He can buff Canoptic units with the control node. He can buff core units with the rights of reanimation. He's got access to being able to buff Praetorians as well as destroy occult units, which is pretty rare. That's with his Arcana. Then he's buffing any dynasty unit with his cloak to heal them. He's got access to relics because he's a character, and also with all the cryptex he's going to have access to the cryptothralls going into the list without using an elite slot. I quite like the synergy with the spiders in particular to repair it while giving them a +1 to hit, which also buffs the scarabs nearby. Negative points include no invuln save, having to pay extra for the 10-inch movement and fly on top of that. All the other cryptex come with fly. He's got no real damage output. Now this one is tempting to actually bump up to a 4.5. I know a lot of Necron players prefer the Chronomancer. Now you can take both for only 1 HQ slot, but their roles are very different. So he's going to be staying at a 4. Next is the Psychomancer. Was given a 3.5 star back in October 2020. Synergizes well with flayed ones, although they're quite an underwhelming unit at the moment, which is a shame because they just received a new look. Access to Arcana and the relics. His debuff ability called Harbinger of Despair, which is very situational but can really put a spanner in the works. However, he's slow. Yes, he synergizes with flayed ones, but like I said, they're quite underwhelming. Then the debuff abilities you can't really plan for. They just sort of happen on the fly. He's got no invuln save, he's got no damage output. For me, this model came with a lot of promise at the start of 9th edition, especially with the emphasis of objectives and the way the game will evolve. But as we've all learned within the edition over the past year, we now all know that the most effective ways of scoring points and defending points, and using the Psychomancer's ability isn't really that needed. Some players still love the model. I've never really been oversold on it. I watched a review back in October from one of the larger battle report companies on YouTube, and they also cover codex reviews, and they went big on this thing, saying that it was an auto include, and I think a lot of people took them on word value, but their reviews are more at a glance, and it was also when the edition was fairly new. So anyway, I'm rambling on a bit with this unit. I'm dropping it down to a 2.5. I think he's below average now, but not useless. Okay, the penultimate unit is the Chronomancer. He was given a 4 star back in October, another solid cryptech choice. He's the quicker of the 4 with movement 8 and with the fly keyword. He's the only one with an invuln save, which makes him be able to mix it up a little bit in the battlefield. He's got a number of weapon options here which others do not, especially the strength 8 entropic lance in particular, which is a must take for me, with the damage being D3+3. His main party piece being the Chronometron ability to grant any dynasty unit a 5+ invuln save, as well as the ability to reroll their charge roll. So it's great for Lichguard with the War Scythes, or Skorpekh Destroyers too. Even Warriors will happily take that. And a lot of mentions in the comments lately, put the 5+ invuln on Scarabs makes them a real nightmare to deal with. So he's also got access to the relics such as the Veil of Darkness, so you can get that with your Lichguard and push them up the battlefield, get them into combat. As for the bad points, he only buffs a single unit, although that sometimes is more than enough to be fair. His unique Arcana is never really going to get seen, but he is one of the better cryptex, so I think he deserves his 4 star. Okay, the final HQ option is the Plasmancer. Unfortunately made its way into the honourable mentions of the worst 10 units in the book. But at the time of doing his review, he was given a very generous 3.5 out of 5 at the time of his release. So let's take a look at the good points first. So he's got one of the better options for range attacks out of the 4 cryptex. He's also got Living Lightning and the Harbinger of Destruction, which is the ability to dish out mortal wounds. He's got access to the relics as well as Arcana, so Dimensional Sanctum Arcana or the Veil of Darkness relic can be really used on him to get him up the field. He pairs quite well with Catan Shards, as they also throw out tons of mortal wounds. However, for me the cryptics are more of a support character, not beat sticks. He has the feel of our version of a Psycho, but even Psychos are more of support options. He's got no invuln save and he's pretty slow at 5-inch. He doesn't really warrant a position in the HQ slots as a HQ model, especially with it being so jam-packed. So he was a 3.5, I think I'm going to be going down to a 2.5 unfortunately. He's now become a below par unit. Quite lucky not to get a straight 2, but he can cause a lot of mayhem, which can be fun. So that's the updated HQ options, guys. We will be doing all the battlefield rolls in the upcoming weeks to update the channel. Drop a like to help push the video, and as always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.